Afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the webinar on planning committee reforms. I'd like to first of all just do a few introductions. So my name is Peter Ford. I work for PAS, and I've got my colleagues from PAS here who are Lauren Ashworth and Steve Barker. Sorry. And also we have Ben Standing and Julia Toon from Brown Jacobson Legal Practice, and Ben Stoneman from the LGA. I'm also very pleased to say that we have from MHCLG today, we have Lucy Hargreaves and Joseph Lowes. We have a good selection of people here, so thank you very much for signing up. We have a combination of planning managers, councillors and council solicitors and monitoring officers. The format for the webinar today is as follows. I'll shortly be passing over to Lucy, who will be saying a few words, and then over to Joseph, who will be giving a presentation from MHCLG on the planning committee reforms. We will then have a look at what you have said in your pre-event survey. If you haven't already filled out the survey, which I sent to you by email, don't worry, you still have time to do that. Steve has just put in the chat the link to the Slido which we are using, so please use that. And also, while that is all happening, we would like you to post some questions, and we have a number of questions that are already posted. If I can just show you briefly, just in case you have trouble finding it, I'm just going to share the screen. Here it works. Yeah, so you'll see here, this is where you are. If you click onto Slido, you've got the poll here, which you hopefully filled in or are filling in. And if you click here on Q&A, you can post your question, simply type in your question there. And as you can see, there's a whole number of questions that have already been posted for today. What we'd also like you to do is, when you do that, if you see a question that you particularly like and you would have liked to have asked it if someone else hadn't got in there before you, then please use the thumbs up icon. And to do that, you will raise it up on the priority list, and we'll try and ask the questions that are most popular during this webinar. So at the end of the webinar, we will do a brief summary of the issues raised and the next steps. Just to say that this is the start of the engagement that we are going to be having with yourselves over the next few months, as the planning committee reforms are agreed and are bedded in. We also, and I'll explain a bit more about that at the end. Also, this is only an hour, this webinar, so don't worry if your question isn't answered today. What we are doing is we're gathering all those questions from Slido, and we will be posting as many of those responses as we can on our website. So don't worry if they're not all answered today. We have actually, we're going to turn off the chat function, so we would like you to use Slido, please. The reason for that is it can be quite distracting, particularly as there's so many people on the call, to try and use both. So please, can you use a Slido? And finally, just to say that this is the first of two webinars which we're holding. The second one is on the 15th of April. We're very conscious that we're in the Easter holidays. So if any of your colleagues couldn't come along today and would like to come to this webinar, it's going to be a repeat of today next week, then please let them know, and they can sign up through Eventbrite in the same way as you have signed up today. So hopefully that is all clear to you, and I'd just like to pass over to Lucy to say a few words.
Oh, yes, thanks, Peter. Just wanted to say, from MHCLG's point of view, thank you very much for giving up your time this afternoon to join the discussion. Very much hope you find it useful. we have been on quite a journey with committee reforms, and many of you may remember we published a working paper to look at ideas for a national scheme of delegation. We then issued a consultation, and we're now at the stage of consulting on the regulations. So we've had lots of engagement with many local planning authorities, and we're very grateful for the time that has been given to that. I think we are now at the stage of a firm proposal, and would be very interested to understand from people how that would work locally for them. It's fair to say it's been built on what we hope is best practice, and we think has evolved quite some time in many ways from the original proposals that went out in the working paper, and that's as a result of lots of engagement. So I'll let Joseph explain the details. What I was just going to say is we haven't got a great deal of time to discuss mandatory training for committee members, which is a proposal that we have discussed and taken powers for in the bill last year in the Planning and Infrastructure Act. That's to sort of follow. So we'd like to focus primarily on the sort of operation of committees today. And we will be saying a lot more in the future about the training provisions. So should we pass to Joseph, who will explain the detail?
Great, thanks, Lucy. I will just get my presentation up on the screen. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Joseph Lowes and I work in the Planning Director at MHCLG. And I'll just talk through the planning committee reforms that we're looking to get views and feedback on today. As Lucy says, we've been on a bit of a journey with this one. And what I'm just going to try and do today is explain how we've got to the regulations, what they say, and we'd be really grateful for any feedback, particularly on practical implementation points. Yeah, any concerns on implementation and what support we can put in place to help you get to that as well. So just to kick off a little bit, I'll talk about the background to the reforms. So ministers had been engaging with the sector, and ideas of reforms to planning committees have been floated around by different bodies, including the RTPI. So we came up with a series of objectives with ministers that they wanted to achieve with reforms to planning committees. And as Lucy says, once we had these objectives, we came up with a sort of working paper and went out to local authorities, developers, councillors to talk about them. But the objectives that we wanted to sort of tackle during the reforms are there was sort of concerns that applicants don't have certainty over how their applications will be considered in different parts of the country. So there can be different outcomes depending on your location. So what we want to do is to create a more consistent approach to decision making, and that's a wider piece of work, including this, but also introducing things like national development decision making policies, which are in the draft NPPF that's been out for consultation. We also wanted to try and tackle inefficiency and delays. So there was concern of limited capacity in some committees across the country, meaning that the applications have to wait for their turn for a committee date, which can take some time. And sometimes even the principle of development's already been established, and so we don't need to sort of consider it again at committee necessarily if the principle's already been discussed. There was also concern that some decisions were being made without proper planning reasons, and that refusals being made were then being overturned at appeal, a small number. And so there was concern that there might be some time lost in that process, and a loss of money in that as well. And then finally, we were looking to make sure that the planning profession is an attractive career and that we're empowering planners to make decisions, but also making sure that there's democratic oversight for those applications that that require it. So I will just talk very quickly about how we got to where we are. So as Lucy said, we did a working paper in December 2024, and we held some workshops with planning authorities, developers and councils. And some of the ideas from that we decided to take forward. Some of it we didn't. So it helped us refine the ideas to come forward with 3 measures that we legislated for through the Planning and Infrastructure Act. These measures were to the power to delegate planning decisions, so that's the power to create a national scheme of delegation, power to control the size and composition of planning committees, and the power to mandate training for committee members. So that bill became an act in December last year, but these powers are just high-level powers that allow the Secretary of State to make rules on this, but we still need to set out the details through regulations. So last summer, we consulted on a model of what we thought we should do, and we had questions on size of committees and on mandatory training as well. And but it focused mainly on the national scheme of delegation and what model we should take forward with that. And broadly, we are proposing to take forward something basically very similar to what we consulted on last summer, with a couple of tweaks to the way the lists operate. But yeah, so we're now out to consult. The consultation's open until the 23rd of April. And I will now talk through a bit of the detail of that model. So you'll be able to access this all online. There's a consultation document, the draft regulations and draft guidance are available on gov.uk, and that's how you can respond to the consultation. But essentially what the regulations propose are that we create 2 lists of types of applications. So these are known as Schedule 1 and Schedule 2. So in Schedule 1 are the types of applications that will always be delegated to officers in every circumstance. So for these types of applications, there'll be no opportunity or possibility to take these types of applications to committee at all under any circumstance. So that's things like minor residential development, minor commercial development, householder development, and then approval of things like conditions, biodiversity net gain plans, and prior approvals for permitted development rights. And then in Schedule 2, we have a list of applications that will be delegated by default. So the starting position for these types of applications is the same as Schedule 1, that they should be presumed to be delegated, but there is a mechanism to take these applications to officers. We call that the gateway test, and so the applications that fall into Schedule 2 could be taken to committee in circumstances that they meet the gateway test. So Schedule 2 list includes things like Section 73 applications, and then applications for larger developments that aren't in the sort of Schedule 1 applications. So residential dwellings for major development. One thing I'll talk about in a second is the approach to reserved matters, which is slightly different to what we consulted on last summer. But first, I'll just talk a little bit more about the gateway test. So the gateway test requires agreement between what we call in the regulations the nominated officer and the nominated member. So what that means in practice is we think it's the chief planner or equivalent in your authority and the chair of the committee or equivalent. And the reason we've not named them as that is just to give you some flexibility if people are on leave or if there's an issue with one of those members not being available or officers not being available. So it gives you flexibility for the system to continue to work. And in order for them to agree that something in Schedule 2 can go to committee, they have to meet one of the two criteria that we've set out in the regulations. So the first is that the application raises an economic, social, or environmental issue of significance to the local area. And the second is where the application raises a significant planning matter having regard to the development plan. So that's sort of how the gateway test should operate. Where there's no agreement between the chief planner and the chair of committee, the application is delegated by default. So as I say, in all circumstances, the presumption is delegation unless they're agreed through the gateway test. And we'll be working with PAS to provide some more guidance and support to authorities on how to handle this sort of this process. And I think the other thing that it's important to say, I've had some conversations with local authorities over the last few months about this, is just because something is in Schedule 2, which is this list of applications that could go to committee but are presumed to be delegated, it doesn't mean that you have to consider it through the gateway test. So that's only to be used in circumstances where you might want to take something to committee. Otherwise, it can just be delegated, and councils are able to make their own rules underneath that sort of process about how they might want to triage them. So if you're an authority that has a lot of applications in Schedule 2, you can make your own rules about whether you want to take something, how you want to take something through the gateway test, or if you want to delegate them. And so that hopefully means that where you already have a high volume of delegated applications, this won't mean that you have to take more things to committee through the gateway test. It just the options there if you want to. So that's a bit about the gateway test. There's a couple of other matters that I think it's worth raising at the minute. So our approach to reserve matters has changed slightly from our previous consultation. So last summer we proposed that all reserved matters applications would be in Schedule 1, so always be delegated. This time in the draft regulations, we've got a bit more of a nuanced position. So we got quite a lot of feedback in our consultation on concerns about really large scale phased reserved matters coming forward, sometimes 10, 15 years after the original outline, and wanting to have the ability to have sort of political oversight of some of those reserved matters decisions where they're on a large scale. And so we've carved out phased reserved matters, so applications that are granted subject to a phasing plan, and they are in Schedule 2. So if you have a reserved matter in that situation, you could take it to committee if it meted one of the gateway tests and you wanted to, but it doesn't have to. So the consultation asks a question on whether that approach is the right approach. And then the other thing to note is just we have made specific provision for local authorities' own applications, and that also includes applications by officers, members, or by bodies owned by the local authority, so development bodies that might be owned by the local authority in part or in full. And essentially, if the applications in that category, again, presumed to be delegated, but you can take it to committee, and to take an application in that category to committee, you don't need to meet the gateway test. So it means that that if you want to take it for transparency reasons, you can do, and you don't need to prove that it has a particular planning issue that you need to discuss. So that is on the detail of the regulations. The other thing that the regulations include is a cap on the size of committee members. So when we consulted last summer, we proposed that we would cap it at 11 members. We've reflected on the feedback that we got from that consultation, and the regulations propose that there's a cap of 13 members. So that should that reflects sort of best practice that we've gathered from our research and from the consultation. And so it means that committees won't be allowed to have more than 13 members sitting on it. There's nothing to say that you can't have less than that, though, if that works for your authority. And then, as Lucy says, on mandatory training, we will sort of come back to the sector with more on that after we've moved a bit further forward with the implementation of the national scheme of delegation, but it's definitely still something that we're looking to implement. So I'll just touch on the implementation timetable, and this is something that we're also keen to get feedback on from local authorities, and just practically whether this is sort of achievable, what it means for your authority in terms of getting dates in the diary for constitutions to be amended. So our consultation is open until the 23rd of April. We hope to consider the responses and lay regulations in the Houses of Parliament in the summer, and they need to have debates in both houses before they can be made. So, subject to getting approval from both houses and the debates happening over the summer, we would want the regulations to sort of be finalised by July, so ahead of the summer break. And we would set a date, if that was the case, for councils to amend their constitutions to reflect the regulations by the 30th of September. So that means between the July date and the coming into force date, local authorities would need to amend the constitutions to reflect the regulations. So just really keen to get a sense from authorities on whether they think that that is an achievable timetable and any concerns with that. So yeah, that's all I was gonna present on today. The sort of key things that would be really useful from our perspective is to get a sense of whether there's any practical issues with the list of applications in either schedule. So is there a reason why something shouldn't be in Schedule 1 or can't be in Schedule 2? Or is there something that we're silent on? So, for example, we've not made provision for enforcement matters because we think local authorities can continue to decide how they want to handle enforcement matters. Is there something we're silent on that you think we need to be explicit about? And is our approach to reserve matters the right one? Is the other question that we ask in our consultation. And then on implementation timetable, is what we've set forward achievable? And then, as Pete said at the start, we'll be doing some work with the Planning Advisory Service to support authorities in implementing these measures. So what would you need to support you in implementing these measures? That's it for me. I will stop sharing my screen now.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Joseph and Lucy. Just before we go on, on the chat, a couple of people said they couldn't see that presentation. Just say we are going to be posting the presentation on the website as part of the feedback today. But if any of you haven't been able to see the presentation now and want to see it urgently, then if you could please just email the PAS inbox, and then we'll make sure you get a copy of that as quickly as possible. So apologies if you haven't been able to see that presentation. Right, before we go on to the question and answer session, I'm just going to hand over to Steve, who's going to share some of the results of the pre-survey results. So thank you very much everyone for doing it, and hopefully you've all had a chance to fill it in now.
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, so there's a couple of survey questions through the Slido which we were asked to actually just to respond to. So generally thinking about what the impact of the proposed reforms around planning committee are going to be. So as you can see from here, from the first one, Probably about a third saying it's extensive, the impact, and kind of majority of them saying that some of this is going to impact, you know, a bit more than others, and a few kind of starting to think that it's not quite clear at the moment. The other side of we asked a couple more questions as well. So one of which was just about giving us highlighting up some of the specific elements, and we're going to try and go through some of these after the session. It's really helpful for us just to be able to highlight what, you know, which specific elements are going to bite, which bits PAS might be able to help along the way with. And then the third one was just about how confident you are to be able to make the requirements to the change. And again, kind of 2/3 kind of about saying quite confident, or majority saying kind of, you know, majority really kind of saying they're quite confident or very confident, kind of a few saying not so confident at all. And I'm sure that will kind of be unpicked a bit with some of the specifics of the responses. We're going to leave that open for a little bit. We're going to run another survey at the end just to give you an opportunity to kind of comment on the session, but also some elements where you might want some support as well. So we'll keep that one running whilst the session's on. But lots of questions coming under the Q&A. So I'm going to hand back to Pete actually now, I think, where we'll try and go through some of those questions for you.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Steve. Yeah.